Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we're jumping right into a really powerful parable about transformation. It's all about how we can stop fighting our past and instead learn to turn our inherited struggles into a kind of personal freedom. Okay, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at the core problem, what the story calls the wall of heritage. Then, we'll explore a totally new way of thinking with a crystal of the self. After that, we'll see how this new path gets tested, how it leads to this amazing transformation, and finally, what it all means to find the gold of freedom. So, let's dive into our first section, the wall of heritage. And this is such a potent metaphor because it gets right to the heart of the story's big idea, this unwinnable fight we all have with our past. So picture this. In a garden, there's this massive granite wall covered in old, thorny vines. That's our heritage, right? Our past. And for generations, people have felt like those thorns are literally a part of their own skin because the blood on the leaves is their own. So what do? They attack it with iron, trying to hack it down. But all this does is trap them in a hopeless cycle of reactive violence. And what happens when you fight the past with force? Well, the parable just nails it with this line. Every cut produces a new, sharper barb. The harder you attack your past, the more it seems to fight back. That wall doesn't get smaller, it just grows taller and even more painful with every angry swing. And this brings us to a really cool concept, the state. It's described as this primal state of the soul, where we're stuck in the delusion that our past is some solid thing that we have to move with brute force. You know that feeling? Just being stuck in a fight that feels completely unwinnable? That's the state. So, if fighting the wall is a dead end, what's the alternative? Well, that brings us to our second section, a crystal of the self, which lays out a radically different path, the path of being. So instead of another warrior, we meet a woman who isn't carrying a weapon. She's holding a small, clear crystal. Now, this crystal is herself, and she's polished it through quiet introspection until it just reflects pure light. This is the idea of the beautiful soul. It doesn't go to war with darkness. It just becomes so bright that darkness, well, it has nowhere left to hide. And this slide right here, this is the whole game changer. On the one hand, you've got the struggle of doing. You're striking the wall, you're fighting, you're always planning your next attack. But on the other hand, you have the mastery of being, polishing your own crystal self, growing an inner garden, and just remaining still and luminous. It's a huge shift from external battle to internal strength. But of course, as soon as you choose a different path, it's gonna get tested. And that's what our next section, Shadows and Old Laws, is all about, seeing how this inner light holds up against the pressures of the outside world. First up, a weary traveler shows up, and this guy is just consumed by anxiety, totally convinced he's being hunted by invisible wolves. He's really a symbol of the modern mind, right? Always seeing threats everywhere, living in a constant state of fear. Now, the woman doesn't hand him a sword to fight the wolves. She just holds up her crystal and invites him to look at the light inside it. And that's when he has this huge realization, captured in the quote, "The wolves are but the long shadows cast by his own rigid posture." His fears weren't real, they were just projections of his own inner turmoil. The next test is even bigger. It comes from the master of the wall. Think of him as the voice of the old way of doing things, the old law that thinks control is the only way to be safe. He's terrified that without the thorny wall, chaos will take over. So he demands she use her crystal's light as a weapon and scorch the earth. And her refusal here, this is the pivotal moment. She gets a fundamental truth that's captured so perfectly in this quote. A light used to burn is no longer a light. She refuses to compromise her integrity. She won't weaponize her inner light, not even for what looks like a good reason. And this refusal, this absolute commitment to her own truth, it triggers something amazing. Which brings us to section 4, when thorns become roses, and the miracle it calls humanity. So what happens next isn't magic. The parable gives it a name, humanitate, and it's defined as the inevitable reaction of the material world when it meets a truly independent moral will, like the woman's. Put simply, when you change your inner world with real integrity, the outer world has to respond. It's a natural law. So let's trace exactly how this unfolds, because it's like a chain reaction. First, a truth is spoken. She states her peaceful intention. Second, a moral will is encountered. She refuses to cause harm. Third, the material world responds, and the very nature of the wall starts to shift. And finally, the thorns blossom into roses. The ugly barrier becomes something beautiful. And what about our terrified traveler? Well, his wolves just disappear. Poof, gone. Why? Because the light that changed the wall also got rid of the shadows that were creating the wolves in the first place. It just proves the whole point of the story. When you find inner clarity, the things you thought were external threats can just dissolve. And all of this leads us to our final section, the gold of freedom. This is really about the ultimate payoff of all this inner work. It's nothing less than the alchemy of the soul. So the core philosophy here is that we are the crucible. We are the place where the heavy lead of our fate and our past can be transformed into the gold of freedom. The story tells us we are not victims of our ancestors, unless we choose to be. We have the power to choose the purely human, our own light and integrity, over the purely necessary world of force and fighting. Real transformation, it says, is that final parting of ways between shadow and light. And the parable ends with this absolutely beautiful call to action. Let us then polish our own crystals, that we may turn our own thorns into roses. It's a direct invitation to every one of us to stop fighting the walls out there and start cultivating the light in here. And really, that's what this entire story leaves us with. It's not just a nice tale. It's a mirror. So the final question isn't for the characters in the story. It's for you. How will you turn your own thorns into roses?